Yeah. One-step equations. Your job is to locate the variable. And as a reminder, a variable is just the letter. It's the letter we don't know the value of. So that's what a variable is. It's a number that we don't know the value of right now. So we're going to locate the variable. Then we're going to determine the operation that's tied to that variable. That could be plus, minus, division, multiplication. We'll talk about square roots, squaring things. And then we're going to use something called the inverse operation. Your inverse operation is the opposite of what's happening to it. So if I add something, what do you think the opposite of adding something is? Subtracting. If I multiply something, what would the opposite of that be? Division. So we just have to know which links together. And then we're going to check our solution by plugging in and make sure it actually works. All right, that's all of our steps. So we already said these. We said, hey, if we see its addition, the opposite is subtraction. For multiplication, it is division. Correction. So addition is going to turn to subtraction. Multiplication is going to turn to division. We have to undo it. It's kind of like you're taking off your shoes, right? You put your shoes on, you tie them, but to take them off, you have to undo what was that? I need to untie them and then pull them out. I have to do exactly the opposite of it to undo what's happening to it. Okay, so we're untying the equation, basically. So if we look here, we have x plus 7 equals negative 1. Now, what we want to know is, what value of x makes this statement true? Probably negative 8. Well, it's pretty easy when it's like this, right? But let's go through all the steps, because otherwise we're just kind of guessing and checking. Because I would be like 3 plus 7 is 10, 3 doesn't work. So you guys kind of guessed and checked until you got to negative 8, right? But what we can do is we can do what they said up there, and that is to first locate our variable, x. What's being done to the x on the left-hand side? I'm adding 7. What's the opposite of adding 7? And we're going to subtract 7. I'm going to put a minus 7 right below it. Here's where solving for x, we have to remember a crucial thing. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. Otherwise, you don't have a balanced equation anymore. So if I subtract 7 here, I must do it to the other side. And what I mean by other side is, you see this equal sign? I have two sides of the equal sign. I have a left side and I have a right side. So what I do to one side, I subtracted 7. I have to subtract 7 from the other side. What's positive 7 minus 7? 0. These cross out. That was our point of that. We're undoing what happened on the left-hand side. So now I just have the x on that side. And now I have negative 1 minus 7. What does that equal?
Negative 8.
It equals a negative 8. So x equals negative 8. Now our last step is to check that it worked. To check that it works is we just take this negative 8 and we plug it in for that x, like that one chapter we have where we can just plug in the value. Once I find out x equals negative 8, I can go ahead and I can plug it in. So I'm going to check my solutions over here. Let's check to see if it works. So I'm going to plug the negative 8 in for the x. So instead of x plus 7, I'm going to have negative 8 plus 7. And that should equal a negative 1. Well, what's negative 8 plus 7? What's negative 8 plus 7? It is negative 1. Does negative 1 equal negative 1? Then it checks out. If you plug it in and it doesn't work, that means you made a mistake. And sometimes it can be just as easy as plugging in your calculator. Like if I was checking this and I had my calculator, I would just go, okay, negative 8 plus 7. Make sure it equals negative 1. All right, so our job, once again, we locate the variable. We see what's being done to it. We undo it to move it to the other side. We're basically taking everything and moving it away from the variable. All right, our next variable's m. What's being done to the m? We're subtracting what? We're subtracting 11. What's the opposite of subtracting 11? Adding 11. So we are going to add 11. Now what you do to one side, what do you have to do to the other?
The other side.
You have to do it to the other side. The exact same thing. You got to do the exact same thing to the other side. So I'm going to add 11 to the other side. Now remember, it's the other side of the equal sign. All right, negative 11 plus 11, well, that just cancels out and turns to 0. And I'm just left with m. Equals, well, negative 9 plus 11, that should be a positive 2.
Wait. Negative 1?
What was that?
Wait, would it be negative m plus 11? I mean, negative 9 plus 11?
It would be negative 9 plus 11, yes. But what's bigger? What's bigger, 11 or 9? 11, so the positive should take over, right? Mm-hmm. Remember, the bigger one, that sign's going to stay there. So if I have 11 and negative 9. Now, real quick, in your calculator for me, type in 2 minus 11.
Negative 9.
Did it work?
Yes.
Yeah. If we plug it in and it comes out correctly, we did everything right. Let's try the next two. Give 3 and 4 a shot. You have to locate the variable, what's being done with it, and it'll be either adding or subtracting, and do the opposite of what's there. So if you have a positive number, subtract. If you have a negative number, add. All right, these are a little bit different than the first ones, right? Because we have the variable on the other side. But still, we have a positive 14, right? What's the opposite of a positive 14?
Negative 14.
A negative 14. So you should have realized that I was subtracting 14 on both sides. Now, for those of you that are messing this up, make sure you write your notes the same way I do. I put a little line on the equal sign. I make sure I put the numbers below, and I make sure I understand the math. Because what's 14 minus 14 if you plug in your calculator?
0.
0. So this cancels out. Did I cross out the x?
No.
Or the h, I mean.
No.
No, you only cross out the number because we're moving it to the other side. So now that h will come down here. So that h comes down, and I have 9 minus 14, which should be a negative 5. What's 14 minus 5 if you plug down your calculator?
14 minus 5 is negative 9. Where'd you get 5?
Whew, whew.
14 minus 5
Whew.
is 9.
Maybe I should write this down. We have a lot of people shouting things. So let's check our answer. Let's check our answer. We're supposed to have 9 equals 14 plus a negative 5. What's 14 plus a negative 5?
14 plus 5?
Whew. Whew. We got to go back to day 1, I think, here. What's 14 plus a negative 5?
9.
It's 9.
Plus 5.
No. All right, so we have 9 equals 9. That checks out. Like I said, you can just plug in your calculator if you're not sure. Just plug in 14 plus a negative 5 or 14 minus 5, which is the exact same thing. Okay, our next one, we have negative 15. Now, here's what I saw a bunch of people do. This is wrong, so don't write it down just yet. I saw people like, oh, I'm going to subtract 15. What's negative 15 minus 15? Plug in your calculator. What's negative 15? Don't shout anything out. What's negative 15 minus 15? I want us all to plug that in our calculator. It comes out to negative 30. Does that cancel out? Shh. Yeah. Yeah, so it's going to go further negative. So if you wrote negative 15 minus 15 and you crossed it out, you weren't doing proper math because that wouldn't cross out. What would cross out with a negative 15? What's the opposite of negative 15? Positive 15. So we are going to add 15. And what I do to one side, I do to the other side. So we're going to add 15 to the other side. So negative 15 plus 15, that will now cancel out. We have the W equals 14 plus 15, which is 29. All right, guys, let's put the 29 in for the W. What happens in our calculator if I type in negative 15 plus 29?
You get 14.
You get 14 out, which is correct. So those that did it wrong and came out the wrong answer, you just never checked your answer. Always check your answer, especially when they're this quick. You just plug in your calculator. You just type in, negative 15 plus 29. We should come out the correct answer. All right. What do you think we do if we have a decimal?
Round.
We do not round. Do we have calculators, though? Okay, what's the opposite of subtracting 17.9? Adding 17.9. So once again, we have two sides of an equal side. One side we're going to do the opposite, add 17.9, and I need to add 17.9 to this side. That's going to give me A equals
50.3.
Anyone else get 50.3? Plug it in. Make sure you get the same answer.
Yeah, you got it. I got some 50.
I got
50.3 is correct. You didn't get that, Malia? Make sure you type it in correct. So it's 32.4 plus 17.9. Because we already know this is going to turn to 0 because these are opposites. These are opposites, so they're going to turn to 0. You good? Okay. All right. Shh. Can I talk? Okay. Our next one. We have fractions now. This is why I put this on our last test. To review how to add or subtract fractions, because we still need to know how to do that stuff. What's the opposite of adding 1/4? Subtracting 1/4. So we're going to, on the left-hand side, subtract 1/4. What do I need to do on the other side if I'm subtracting by 1/4 on one side? I have to subtract 1/4 on the other side. Positive 1/4 and negative 1/4 cancel out. So I know for a fact I have n here. Now, if I let you use your calculators, but we should know how to do this by hand. A lot of us can plug this in our calculator, right, and get the correct answer. But let's talk about on the test. There might be times where I tell you can't use a calculator on that portion. So we still need to know how to add and subtract fractions. So we're going to off to the side do 5/6. And we are subtracting 1/4 from it. Okay, then let's do it. Does anyone remember what we need in order to add or subtract fractions? Yeah. I need a common denominator. I need a number that 6 can go into, that 4 can go into as well. 12? 24? 24 would work too, but 12 is a little easier, okay? All right, real quick, how do I turn, using multiplication, how do I turn 6 into 12? Times 2. That means I need to do it to the top as well. How do I turn 4 into 12 using multiplication?
4 times
4 times 3, so we're going to multiply by 3, which means I need to multiply the top of that fraction by 3. So I'm multiplying this fraction by 2 over 2. I'm multiplying this fraction by 3 over 3. We're using multiplications. That will give me 2 times 5 is 10 over 12. Minus 3 times 1 is 3 over 12. And when we subtract our numerators. So I would do 10 minus 3, which would be 7 over 12. Campbell, does that ring a bell? All right, so now we have 7 over 12. N equals 7 over 12. Okay, let's keep going. We got one again. What's the opposite of a I'm sorry. I just about gave you the answer. What's the opposite of a negative 1/8? A positive 1/8. So if I want to get rid of a negative 1/8, I am going to add 1/8. Those are opposites. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add 1/8 over here. Now we're going to notice they don't have a common denominator, so we're going to go off to the side and we'll go negative 7 over 24, and we are adding 1/8. Now don't shout it out. I want us just to think about it. Raise our hand if we think we got one. Can you think of a number that 24 goes into and 8 goes into? Gabby? 24. I'm going to pick one of those numbers first and foremost to see if the other one goes into it, because I don't have to multiply both of them. So 24 we can just leave alone, right? What do I need to multiply 8 by to get to 24? I have to multiply by 3. So we're going to multiply this equation by 3 over 3. So that's going to give me a negative 7 over 24 plus 3 over 24. Hey, real quick, what's bigger, 7 or 3? 7. So when I do negative 7 plus 3, we should remain negative, right? Yes. But they're going opposite directions. So if I'm at negative 7 and I take 3 steps in the positive direction, what do I have? 4. I have 4. I have negative 4. Is that fraction simplified, 4 over 24? What goes into 4 and also goes into 24? 4 actually does. 6 does not go into 4. So that means we're going to divide the top by 4, and I'm going to divide the bottom by 4 to simplify this. And that's just going to give me a negative 1 over 6. So our end answer is going to be M equals negative 1 over 6. So I think the hardest thing people are going to have for adding or subtracting is when we get to the fractions, because we just haven't practiced those fractions like I wanted us to for the last test. All right, last thing we need to know about fractions. Mixed numbers. How do I get rid of a mixed number? I have to multiply and then add. It's kind of like this big circle thing where I do 8 times 2 and then I add it to 1. So what's 8 times 2? 16 plus 1 is? So we have 17 over 2. We'll do the same thing for the 5. What's 5 times 3? 15 plus 1? 16. So we have 16 over 3. What am I going to do to both sides? I'm going to subtract. And what am I going to subtract by?
7 over 2.
Probably the 17 over 2. Yes. So we'll subtract both sides by 17 over 2. We need to do some work off to the side because I do have to do that subtraction. So we'll have 16 over 3 minus 17 over 2. 6. 6 is the perfect number I'm looking for because 3 goes into 6 and 2 also goes into 6. What do I multiply 3 by to go into 6? 2. So that means I want to multiply the top and bottom by 2. Notice how fractions kind of work like equations. What I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Equations are what I do to the left side, I have to do to the right side. All right, what do I multiply 2 by to get to 6? 3. So 3 times 2, and I have 3 times 17 there. All right, 2 times 16, I can do that. That's 32 over 6 minus, 3 times 17. What's 3 times 17? 51. Jeez. Over 6. Now we have 32 minus 51.
9. Oh, no. It's negative 19.
Not doing this one, Campbell? It's your grade, not mine.
Oh, 51.
What's 32 minus 51?
Negative 19.
Negative 19, thank you. Negative 19 over 6. So remember, we did that 17 over 2 minus 17 over 2, so these cross out. And we're left with A equals negative 19 over 6. Good work. So really, when I'm just adding or subtracting on both sides, it only really gets difficult when we have fractions, right? Because we have to think back of how to do our fractions and our adding and stuff. But we can always use our calculator to double check our answers. Our calculators can keep fractions in them for those who've been practicing it, and it can make your life a little bit easier to check those solutions. All right, so our answer is negative 19 over 6. All right, so that was if we were adding or subtracting, right? We do the opposite. We want to clear that stuff out. The next thing we're going to talk about is what happens when we multiply or divide. Okay, so we locate our variable. What variable do we have in number 1? I have A. I have 4 of them, right? But what's attached to this? What's multiplication? There's technically a multiplication here, right? This says 4 times A. That's the same thing as 4 times A. What's the opposite of multiplication? Division. We are going to divide both sides by 4, and this is how I'm going to symbolize that. I'm actually going to put a division bar, like it's a fraction. And then I'll divide the other one by 4 as well. What's 4 divided by 4? 1. So 4 divided by 4 equals 1, or 1A, right? So we could think of this as being 1A, or just A. Okay, 1A equals, what's 24 divided by 4? Negative 6. So our end answer, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to erase the 1 because that can be confusing. But we technically have A equals a negative 6.
Got it.
Can you do me a quick favor in your calculator? Yeah. What's 4 times negative 6? Did we pick the right number? Yeah. Yes, we did. How hard was it to check it? Not hard at all. Just do it. When we get to the test, we shouldn't have this stuff wrong. We should just be able to check it. All right, our next one. What's our variable?
R.
R. What's being done to the R? It's in a fraction. What's a fraction?
Division.
It is division. So remember, we only have 4 operations we can think about. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So this must be division. What's the opposite of division? Multiplication. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by a negative 8. By exactly what aren't we dividing by a negative 8? If I multiply, I need to multiply by the exact same thing. So I need to multiply by a negative 8. And I'm going to make it a negative 8. And then we'll multiply the other side by a negative 8.
I got my answer.
What's negative 8 times 2?
Negative 16.
It is negative 16. Now remember, we multiplied to undo it. So this negative 8 and this negative 8 will actually cancel out. And you'll be left with just R. When you take a divided by negative 8 and you multiply a negative 8, they cancel out and turn to 1. Just like when I did the 4 divided by 4, negative 8 divided by negative 8 is 1. We have 1r equals negative 16. And your calculator, what happens if you do negative 16 divided by negative 8? 2. Did we do it right? Okay. So if we do it right, it'll all make sense there. All right, now we have kind of a different type of problem here. What's our variable? K. Is it all by itself? No. There's technically a negative 1 in front of it. That's attached by multiplication. So for that one, we are actually going to divide both sides by a negative 1 to cancel out this negative 1 that's there. And divide this one by a negative 1. What's a negative divided by a negative?
Positive.
A positive. So we're going to have a positive k. And 7 divided by 1 is 1, but 7 divided by negative 1 is a negative 7. So we have k equals a negative 7. So if there's ever just a negative in front of there, you're going to make the other side negative by dividing by a negative 1. All right, what's happening on 12? What's happening to the n? It's dividing by 5. What are we going to do? We're going to multiply by 5. Whatever's in the denominator, we multiply by it. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5 times 5 times 5. Our 5s will actually cancel out on this side. Make sure you take your time and write this stuff correctly. Don't do a whole bunch of stuff in your head. Write it exactly how I'm writing it. So we'll have n equals 9 times 5, which just happens to be 45. Do the 13 and 14. Do the 13 and 14. Remember, when you're multiplying or dividing, you're multiplying or dividing by the exact number that's being attached to it. So your job is to do 13 and 14 right now. So this one, my D, what's it being multiplied by?
10.
Not just 10, but negative 10. So I need to divide by a negative 10. Because negative 10 divided by negative 10 cancels out, which means I need to divide the other side by a negative 10 as well. Negative 10 divided by negative 10 cancels out and turns to 1, so I just have 1d equals 40 divided by negative 10 is not 4, but negative 4. For x, it's being divided by a negative 6, which means I need to multiply both sides by a negative 6. So I'm going to multiply this side by a negative 6. Negative 6 divided by negative 6, that will just turn to 1. We multiply this side by a negative 6. And I have x equals, we should have came up with a negative times a negative is a positive.
72.
A positive 72 would be correct. Yeah. When you did negative 6 times what? Yes. Hang on. Hey, guys. Let's pay attention. Great question. Dylan, can we turn around? So Gabby did negative 6 times negative 6 to see if it'd cancel out, right? But remember, this is in the denominator. This is technically in the numerator. So what we're actually doing is we're creating this situation where I have negative 6 on top of negative 6. So we'd have negative 6 divided by negative 6. I bet you that turns into a positive 1. So that's where that positive 1 comes from. It's not negative 6 times negative 6. Remember, we're doing the opposite. It is negative 6 divided by 6. Okay? Does that make more sense? Okay, awesome. Because we need to understand what that opposite means. All right, the last thing we're going to cover, we're just going to do 3 of these problems. To divide by a fraction. Remember how we did keep, change, flip stuff? When we divide by a fraction, we're actually going to multiply by its reciprocal. Make sure I didn't miss anything else in here. Yeah.
On squats.
Cat.
Okay. I don't know why there's so many side conversations. Now, just a reminder what a reciprocal is. It's where you flip the fraction. It's where you flip the fraction is your reciprocal. So on this one, we're multiplying by 2 over 3, right? What fraction do we have if I flip that fraction? 3 over 2. So we're actually going to multiply both sides by 3 over 2. And we're going to multiply this one by 3 over 2 as well. Now, if you look what happens here. When you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. So we have 3 times 2, which would give me 6. On the bottom, I'd have 2 times 3, which is 6, times x, equals, what's 48 times 3?
48 over 1.
I just want 48 times 3 real quick. Yep, it is 48 over 1. But what's 48 times 3? What was that? 144. So we have 144 over 2 on here. This is if I was doing it by hand. We have to realize that when we multiply a whole number, it goes to the top of the fraction. So I have 48 times 3. And I think it was Sean, you said 6 divided by 6 is just 1, right? So that basically just cancels out. That's just a 1. And 144 divided by 2, that should be 72. And now we could have did in our calculator, right? We could have did 48 times 3 over 2 in our calculator as well, and we should have got out 72. Let's try that in our calculator real quick. So let's take our calculator and type in 48 times 3 over 2 and make sure we can get the right value out. Because you shouldn't just take my word on it. 72, get the same thing out? Okay, so we can just plug that in our calculator. Okay, makes it a little easier. All right, let's try that on the next one. If I am multiplying by 4 over 5, how do I clear a fraction again?
4 over 5.
I multiply by the reciprocal. What's the reciprocal of 4 over 5?
5 over 4.
5 over 4, and we'll keep a negative because we want the reciprocal of the exact same thing. So we're going to multiply by a negative 5 over 4, which means I'm going to multiply this side by a negative 5 over 4 as well. Now the 5 over 4 and the 4 over 5 will turn to 1. So my right-hand side is k. And let's take our calculator. What's 60 times negative 5 over 4? We can just plug in our calculator and get our value out. Negative 75. I heard 2 people. Can I get a third person? Negative 75.
Oh, yes, 75.
Negative 75. Let's skip to number 20. All right, number 20, we have a mixed fraction, right? We need to clear that mixed fraction. As a reminder, to clear a mixed fraction, you just need to take the 2 times the 12 and add it to 1. 2 times 12 is 24, plus 1 is 25.
25.
It'd be minus 24.
What? Yeah, it says it's negative.
Well, then we'll subtract a 1.
What?
I'm just saying this is all self-contained. We're going to have we're going to keep the negative outside. But when we do this, if you remember, if we're simplifying this, it is 2 times 12, which is 24, plus 1 is 25, and then we reattach that negative, and it should be 25 over 12. Okay, don't confuse yourself by keeping that negative going around. That will confuse you, and you'll end up having like a negative 23. It is self-contained. That negative stays out front. All right, then we have equals 3 over 4. How do I clear out multiplying by 3 over 4? I multiply by its reciprocal, which is 4 over 3. Maybe I'll try to throw it in here so we can see these two cancel out. And then we're going to multiply this by 4 over 3. Now let's practice like I don't have my calculator on me, okay? When you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. So we'll do 4 times 25, and we'll do 3 times 12. Hey, good morning, Miss Pabian.
4 times 20.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Ty, you're going to go down, but let's finish this real quick, okay? Okay. We're going to multiply this 4 times 25, which should be a negative 100. We saw that negative out front, okay? And 3 times 12 should have given me 36. Shh. Are there any numbers that go into 100 and also go into 4 goes into both of those? So we're going to divide 100 by 4. We'll divide the 36 by 4, which should give me a negative 25 over 9. So the hardest stuff we have is stuff that we were supposed to learn earlier, and that's simplifying fractions and stuff. We can lean our calculator a little bit. Okay. She's still out.